1986 saw the release of Psycho 3, a film that was not particularly well received by critics and audiences, nor was it successful at the box office, so a fourth entry in the Psycho franchise seemed very unlikely. But sure enough, on the 30th anniversary of the original in 1990, Anthony Perkins would return one last time for Psycho 4: The Beginning. But how well does this sequel/prequel fare in comparison to the other entries in the series? Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another review. Today we're going to be talking about Psycho 4. Set 4 years after the events of Psycho 3, Norman Bates is now out on parole, once again played by Anthony Perkins. One evening, Norman decides to call into a radio talk show hosted by Fran Ambrose, played by CCH Pounder, discussing the topic of matricide with her guest, Dr. Richmond, played by Warren Frost, who is supposed to be the same psychologist that was played by Simon Oakland at the end of the original Psycho. Norman then, under the alias of Ed, tells his story through flashbacks as we see the events that led up to him killing his mother, and how he developed his split personality in addition to stating that he will now have to kill again. While in the present, Dr. Richmond realizes that they have been talking to Norman Bates. He then tries to convince Fran to trace the calls, but Richmond's worries are ultimately dismissed as Ambrose continues to pry Norman about his past in order to figure out who he intends to kill in the present. The film was written by Joseph Stefano, who wrote the screenplay for the original Psycho, and was directed by Mick Garris, who also directed the cult classic Critters 2 and would later go on to direct several Stephen King adaptations, as well as creating the horror anthology series Masters of Horror. The whole aspect of using Norman calling into the radio station to frame the flashback sequences of young Norman and Mother works really well here, and does a great job of matching up with everything that we know about Norman's past from the original film, in addition to showing what caused Norman to end up the way he did in the first place. And apparently Mick Garris wanted to film all of the flashback sequences in black and white originally to make it feel much more like the original film, but unfortunately the studio wouldn't let him. The present day sequences are also done really well and are filled with great tension and suspense, as Fran tries to keep Norman on the line whilst also figuring out what he intends to do without scaring him away. And one of my favorite moments is when Norman later unknowingly slips up and reveals that he is in fact Norman Bates. Young Norman is played exceptionally well here by Henry Thomas, who manages to get a lot of the same mannerisms down as Anthony Perkins did in the original, and Olivia Hussey as Norma, whose performance manages to be both alluring and terrifying at the same time. And the always great CCH Pounder as Fran Ambrose is really good here, and you can tell that despite desperately trying to get Norman to reveal who he intends to kill, also feels legitimately sorry for him and what he had to experience in his youth. And of course, Anthony Perkins is once again great as present-day Norman in what ultimately would be his final performance as the iconic character. A very notable aspect of this film though is that it's the only one of the sequels that uses the original Bernard Herrmann score, which very much gives this film a bit more of an authentic feeling compared to Psycho 2 and 3. One aspect of this film that some will take more issue with than others is the fact that it doesn't really directly reference the previous two sequels, other than when Norman is talking about being recommitted after the murders that took place 4 years ago. And while the film doesn't directly reference any particular events from Psycho 2 and 3, it doesn't necessarily dismiss them either. The only real contradiction being when Norman talks about his father's funeral and he explains that he was stung to death by bees, whereas in Psycho 3 it was revealed that Mrs. Spool was the one that killed his father. So you could just say that Mrs. Spool killed him by unleashing bees on him, or you could just say that Norman is just so tormented by the whole thing and the Mrs. Spool debacle that he decided to make that part up, which I think makes more sense to me. Or you could just ignore the ending of Psycho 3 altogether. Overall, Psycho 4 is way better than it has any right to be, especially for a third sequel that was made for TV. It's definitely a step up from Psycho 3, but maybe not quite as strong as Psycho 2. Watching the new 4K restoration, you would never know that this was done as a made-for-TV movie. It doesn't look like it, or at least not any more than the other Psycho films do. And after all, Alfred Hitchcock did use his TV crew from his anthology TV series Alfred Hitchcock Presents to make the original Psycho. But what I really like about this film is that it manages to work really well as not just a prequel to the original Psycho, but also as an ultimate end to the series overall. And knowing that Anthony Perkins died just 2 years after this film was made definitely makes the ending hit a lot harder. And with Psycho 2 getting a lot more love and praise in recent years, I would go as far as to say that Psycho 4 has now taken its place as the new most underrated film in the franchise. Thanks for watching this review. Be sure to subscribe for more videos, and until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.